The gospel reading is from Luke 14, verses 1 and 7 through 14, and it's in the New Testament section on page 77. On one occasion, when Jesus was going to the house of the leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. When he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come and say to you, "Give this person your place." And then in disgrace, you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, "Friend, move up higher." Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who will humble themselves will be exalted. He said also to the one who had invited him, "When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return, as you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Thank you, Ruth, so much. Thank you. Greatly appreciate it. And thank you, Sohi, again for singing for us today. We all know that most banquets and formal dinners today, such as you find at a wedding reception, usually have designated seating for the guests, right? We'd agree, maybe a little table card or something like that. For weddings in particular, the placement of your seat is in direct proportion to your relationship with the couple. The closer you are to the dais, or to the bride and groom's table, as it is called, the more valued you are by the couple or their families. As one who has attended many of these receptions over my 44 years of ministry, unless the couple are members of your church or related to them, the ministers are always seated at the back tables. And usually it's worse. Only a couple of people are seated with them, because nobody wants to sit with a minister. I wonder why. Well, having had luncheons with many ministers, I really understand it. I really do. In fact, it's a fact today, and it's been going this way for years. Many ministers will not attend receptions anymore unless it's for church members or their families. They'll do the ceremony, but they will not attend the receptions. The reason I think that ministers are kind of shoved off to the back table is because once a minister completes performing the service, he or she becomes less valuable or needed by the wedding party. It's great to have the pastor there to do the vows, to get the wedding done, but they don't want the pastor at the party. And that's my favorite part. Jesus himself used the table order at a banquet to illustrate the meaning of humility, using a parable that was practical, spiritual, and challenging. Christ's parable referred to a moment when Jesus observed a group of Pharisees, wealthy people, jockeying for seating positions at a banquet to which Jesus had been invited. Like all banquets at that time, your importance was designated by how close you sat to the host. That's That's how you could tell the pecking order at one of these banquets, at one of these feasts. That Christ had been invited to the gathering by the leader of the Pharisees is actually a little bit suspect in and of itself, since at least some of the Pharisees there would have already considered Christ their enemy. That was at least the beginning to develop at that time. Luke tells us that the Pharisees watched Jesus closely, and that's kind of a clue. That might imply that the invitation may not have been necessarily a sincere one. Perhaps it was a trap, or maybe at a minimum, an opportunity to embarrass Jesus in front of a group of prominent citizens. In other words, a way to put Jesus in his place. He certainly would have been the odd one out of that group. Perhaps that's what it was, to put him in his place. The Pharisees, who were wealthy and powerful, of course, were accustomed to being seated at the places of honor whenever they were among the people of Israel. It didn't matter whether it was a house or a synagogue, the temple, or in any gathering. And we know this for real, that at least to some degree, they bought these seats. They bought them in the same way that the wealthiest buy the prime seats at most entertainment events today. They purchased those seats. At the meal which Jesus attended, Luke might have intended this story to be kind of a little humorous, as these Pharisees pushed each other around, trying to get to the best seat. No, that's where I should be. No, that's where I should be. Probably kind of pushing each other around, which is literally what would have happened. Luke presented them rushing to grab the seats of honor, which were the seats, as I said, closest to the host. And what's great is this whole time, Jesus is quietly observing that chaos. He's just watching. I like that image. Jesus noticed things. Jesus, wherever he went, picked up what was going on. And out of it, gave a lesson. He did that all the time. He said, look over here. Look what's happening. At some point at the banquet, either after everyone was already seated or while they were rushing to get the best seats in the house, Jesus presented to the gathering a very practical lesson, a very common sense lesson. Jesus advised them that rather than fighting for the best seat at the table, rather than fighting for the highest position, they should instead seat themselves intentionally in the lowest position. Go to the back of the table. Go to the back of the place. The table in the back. Go back there. Which would be the seat, by the way, farthest away from the host. Jesus said that when the host of the banquet saw that a prominent guest or a close friend had taken a humbler seat, the host would then publicly insist that the guest move to a higher place of honor, demonstrating before those who attended the value of the relationship between the host and the guest. Jesus told the Pharisees not to honor themselves, but to humble themselves, so that if any honor was given, it was not any that they generated for themselves, but was given to them by another. In other words, don't recognize yourself. Let others recognize who you are. After expressing this principle of moving from lower to higher honor, at least in a place at the table, Jesus reminded the gathering of the embarrassment and loss of face when one taking a seat or taking a higher place at the table was ordered by the host to move to a lower place. How embarrassing that would be. The host goes, "You're in the wrong seat. You're in the wrong seat. Go to the back of the room. You're in the wrong seat." Jesus was summarized the parable in both a practical and spiritual context, and that's what he was doing here in his summary to the Pharisees. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Of course, he immediately transforms the practical into the spiritual. Jesus transformed the lesson beyond the simple courtesies or formalities of seating at a banquet and placed a challenge before his listeners, a challenge so radical, it could only be understood by those who embraced Christ as Lord and Savior. Jesus was truly reaching out to them there. Who would be willing to do that among this incredible group of wealthy and powerful people? He aimed this challenge of self-deprecation not just at the guest, but also at the host who had invited him there in another conversation. Responding to the challenge that Jesus proposed to both the host and his guests was probably and actually beyond the ability of the Pharisees to either understand or to do. It was truly counterculture. It really was. They were the winners in life. They sat in the seats of honor. They had the trappings of authority. They had the power to judge others. They were also considered spiritually the most beloved of God because of their many blessings. Yet Jesus had called them over and over blind guides. Jesus had called them hypocrites. Why? Because even though they had these incredible blessings, they refused to use those blessings to bless others. And that angered Jesus to no end. It frustrated him. There's a story, you may have heard it before, that shortly after he took over the presidency of the Tuskegee Institute, Dr. Booker T. Washington was walking in an exclusive section of town when he was stopped by a very wealthy white woman. She asked if he would like to earn a few dollars by chopping wood for her. Because at that time he had no pressing business, Dr. Washington smiled, rolled up his sleeves, and proceeded to do the chore. As he was working, someone from the neighborhood recognized him, and later, after he left, revealed his identity to the lady. The next morning, the embarrassed woman went to see Dr. Washington in his office at Tuskegee, where she apologized profusely, profoundly. Washington replied, "It is perfectly all right, madam. Occasionally, I enjoy a little manual labor. Besides, it's always a delight to do something for a friend." A friend. Think about that. Think about the culture at that time. Think about the relationship between the races at that time. And calling that person a friend. Well, later, that friend became a major supporter of the Tuskegee Institute. That's humility. And unlike Dr. Washington, the Pharisees exemplified those who reveled in judgment more than humility or patience and love. I mean, certainly Dr. Washington had every reason to act offended. How dare you, lady? How dare you? You want to make it up? Write me a check. He wasn't going to do that. He never once mentioned that. He said, I love you. I love you. And that's what the Pharisees were missing. Although the Pharisees were the most religious of those who lived in Israel, their pride refused to acknowledge that their blessings were not their own, but a gift from God. Blessings provided not as a sign of God's favor upon them, but as a means to share their blessings with others. The Pharisees refused to accept that for God, winning was not the best seat. Winning was not the best table. In fact, just the opposite. Jesus taught us that in this fallen world, no one wins. No one. Only love wins. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Jesus said that to the host, which is very interesting. I wonder if the host ever actually did that. I doubt it. I truly doubt it. It was a very alien concept to the Pharisees and to that culture to invite the poor or the crippled or the lame and the blind to any seat in any house. But Christ said it was an expectation that he had of his followers in his house, which was his Father's house, God's house. When we look at our own lives, we have to ask this question. If our lives are a feast, if our lives are a banquet for the suffering and the needy in this world, when is the last time we offered them a seat at our good table? When was the last time we comforted a grieving heart? When was the last time we encouraged an eager mind or simply prayed for the sick? When is the last time we stopped to lend a hand or volunteered for an inconvenient task at an inconvenient time? I'll acknowledge that's hard to do. This morning, Christ has promised us a place at his eternal table. As he said to his disciples at the Last Supper, do you remember these words? For who is greater, he said to them, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one seated at the table? But I am among you as one who serves, and I confer on you, just as my Father has conferred on me, a kingdom, so that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom. In other words, we have an invitation to the greatest table, to the greatest banquet that will ever be. But in the meantime, Do we recall how Jesus provided us that seat at God's good table? Was it through our own goodness? Was it through our own efforts? We know. The cross reminds us. Jesus secured that place for us at God's good table by his death upon the cross. But the question then comes, what place have we made for Christ in our lives? Where have we provided good tables for others? Where have we provided a banquet, a feast, a party, a celebration for those in need? The late comedian Lily Tomlin once said this: "The world is a rat race. The trouble with being in the rat race is that even if you win, you're still a rat." And that's true, isn't it? God did not put us here on this earth to win. But God did put us here to love, because love wins every time. It wins hearts, it wins souls, it wins minds. Every time. Christ put us here to glorify God in whatever we do, not for our own sakes, but for those who need the good table, a place of love. This day, there is a seat at a table in a place somewhere in our lives that needs our loves, that needs our presence, that needs our effort. All we have to do is hear the voice of Christ calling to us and go there and invite those in need to join us. That's all. Because everyone is welcome at that table. And that is the only table that ever was or ever will be where no one walks away empty. Ever. Amen.